Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this second evening of Concord Town Meeting. Today is Tuesday. It's April 5th. This is 2016. My name is Eric Van Loon, 95 Martha's Point Road, our elected town moderator. Seated beside me, or actually soon to be seated beside me, is our town clerk, Anita Techley, who will be keeping a full record of our proceedings this evening. I see that a quorum is present for our meeting. Town meeting is the legislative body of our town, so we approve expenditures and make policy in the same way that the Congress or state legislature does, but unlike for national and state legislative bodies where we pick somebody else to go and do the work, here at town meeting, every individual voter can come, deliberate, participate, speak, and vote. So I do want to say a special thank you to every one of you who are here tonight. I know everyone's schedule is busy, and you found time in your busy schedules to be here. And also to you who are watching on Channel 8, CCTV, or 88.3 WIQH. Thanks for keeping up on town affairs from home. We're working to keep town meeting accessible to everyone. So for parents, there is affordable professional child care right here in the high school. For seniors, there is free van service through the Council on Aging. And for persons with disabilities, arrangements can be made through our assistant town manager. And in addition, I do want to note that there are listening devices available right outside. If there's any folks for whom that would be helpful, it's right at the left end of the check-in table. And also, I wanted to call everyone's attention to signs along here, the ease of access in this main aisle. Those seats are being held for those who need to be close. So if you're particularly young, athletic, spry, and have good eyesight, don't need to be close, if you could leave those seats for folks who do need to be closer. I'd like to introduce a few key people who for tonight's proceedings. Last night we elected Margaret Briggs of 253 Elm Street to be the deputy moderator. She is presiding in the cafeteria, and she would assume this podium in case I need to step down for any reasons. Other persons who were appointed assistant moderators are Gary Clayton of Center Village Drive, Carolyn Flood of 1289 Main Street, and James Smith of 14 Edmonds Road. Tonight, Mr. Clayton will preside in the gymnasium if we need to open that up. Because there may be some voters who are new to town meeting, I want to quickly identify some other of our public leaders, but ask please hold applause, if any, until the end. Here on the center right is the Board of Selectmen, led by our chair this year, the Select Board, led by our chair, Alice Kaufman, and with them is our town manager, Chris Wayland. Further on the right there is our town finance committee. This is 15 very hardworking citizens who have produced the wonderful book, which is really our guide, our program for tonight's proceedings. If you have any questions about procedures at all, they can be answered by our town meeting resource person, Joanna Glazer. If Joanna is right here, and sitting right next to her is our town counsel, Kevin Batt from Anderson and Krieger, in case we get into a legal thicket and need Kevin's help. All amendments to any motions ought to be brought down here in writing, 2 copies to Mark Howell, our IT director, and here to Anita Techley. Now, each of you should have already checked in and should already have received a colored voting slip in some very unusual green type color. Please keep your voting slip handy. It's absolutely your key and your only key to participation. No votes. Your vote will not be counted if you happen to lose use. Hold on to that. the key document for following activities and participating tonight is this blue-covered document. It's the annual report of our Town Finance Committee. It has not only the blue cover, but campaign buttons in the middle, and it has 4 key parts. Right inside in the front is a full listing in order of all 59 warrant articles with the summary recommendations of the Select Board and the Finance Committee for any articles for which they had positions at the time this went to press. Secondly, there's a full inclusion of all of the warrant articles, including explanatory boxes for each. Third, there is a marvelous and comprehensive exposition of information about town finances and financial trends. And fourth and last, in the middle, those green pages are a summary of procedural things that are very helpful for everybody to know and keep handy during town meeting. Out on the lobby tables are additional green documents. Documents in green like this are Concord Town Meeting traditions and procedures. Everything in green is procedural. Other matters are on white paper, and the white paper are substantive matters that relate to either motions for tonight or background materials or lengthy amendments. So if you didn't stop to get copies of those, it's very useful to have. Sometimes the motion will be that town meeting take action on something as printed in the handout, and that would be because things have changed since the time of the printing of the warrant. And now I'd like to ask our Fire Chief, Mark Cotreau, to come forward for an important announcement. And as he does, I'd like to ask each of you to please pull out your cell phone, make sure it's in the vibration mode.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We want to have a safe town meeting tonight, and to that end, just a couple of items. If you look around, no matter what room you're in, and you look around, you'll see an exit sign with a door under it. If the alarm goes off or you're otherwise instructed to exit the building, then that's the door nearest you is the one you should go through. And when you go through it and you look around, there'll be another door that goes directly outside. So I just ask, it's a new building and kind of a new environment for us to really take a minute out and just make sure that you know the way out of the building and where your nearest exit is. We want to keep some good aisle space, so especially in the cafeteria, if we could have people not be moving around the chairs that are around the tables, that'd be terrific. We want to make sure we have good aisle space. And if you have children in daycare, the daycare is in the maroon gym, and if the alarm goes off, they're going to go out just like you would, the shortest way to go outside. So they'll be out front with the daycare providers waiting for the parents. So if you want to meet up with your children, you just go out like you normally would here and walk around the front of the building. It's not very far, and you'll all be safe, and that's a good thing. Thanks, and have a great night.
Thank you very much, Chief Cotreau. More than 250 of your fellow citizens actively participate in town government through more than 35, I think the number is 37 different town boards and committees. And if you could be interested in serving with them, participating, there are green cards like this available out on the tables in the lobby. They're also able to be filled in online, and also the last page of your Finance Committee report has a green card, although it happens to be in white. So if you're interested, interest in serving is the primary criteria, and it's the main source of person power, really, for all of our town boards and committees. So I'd urge you to consider filling them out and doing so. Also, I wanted to call your attention before we get rolling to white sheets, which are available outside, forms for town meeting. We want to know what you feel works well, what works less well, And in particular, since we're in the first run here in a new building with 3 new rooms, there are added questions this year for you to fill out what you liked or didn't like about being in the auditorium or the cafeteria or the gymnasium. There are boxes at the exit where these can be deposited at the end of tonight, or they can be filled in and sent to online or to the town manager's office. Tonight, again, Mr. Abraham Fisher of Hayward Mill Road is serving as our head teller, assisted in the cafeteria by Greg England. And in the event that we need to take a counted vote, the ballots will be supervised by David Carr of Lawsbrook Road. Mr. Fisher and Mr. England and Mr. Carr are the tellers and the ballot counters ready to be sworn. We are. Thank you. Then can I ask all of the tellers and ballot counters, both here in the auditorium and in the cafeteria, if you would please rise and raise your right hand. Do each of you make oath that you will faithfully and impartially perform your respective duties at this town meeting? Yes. Thank you very much. Your work is really vital to our work, and of course, don't forget to count your own votes. We do have a final procedural motion tonight. Ms. Kaufman moves that we take up no new business after 10 p.m., and that when we recess, we reconvene here in these same halls at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. Is there a second? I see there is. All in favor, aye. Opposed, no. It's a vote. Thank you very much. During the previous several minutes, I've identified a number of people who are serving in various special capacities tonight. Many of us who appreciate and cherish the special quality of life here in Concord may not have stopped to consider that this specialness didn't just happen. It's the result of an enormous caring effort by many talented citizens who have labored long and hard to help create the quality of life that we're lucky enough to be able to enjoy. So tonight, before we move into the substantive work of the warrant, we pause to recognize and thank 3 special people to whom we owe an enormous amount. And while these tributes are limited to the usual 2-minute presentations, our gratitude to them is timeless. So let me first call on Town Manager Chris Whalen.
Mr. Moderator, Chris Whalen, Town Manager. I live at 1935 Main Street.
Please proceed.
This year's annual town meeting will be Finance Director Tony LaGalbo's last rodeo. He informed me last week that he will be retiring on August 31st of this year after 36 years of exemplary service to the town. Tony grew up in Astoria, Queens, and attended the respected Stuyvesant High School in the Tribeca section of Manhattan. He received a BS in Management Engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in 1968, and a master's degree the following year from Purdue University. He spent 4 years in the finance department of Oakland, California, and then 4 years as the Director of Administrative Services for the Massachusetts Municipal Association in Boston before leaving to pursue a master's degree in public administration from Harvard, which he received in 1980. Tony was hired by the former town manager Steve Schaefer in July of 1980 to serve as treasurer, tax collector, and finance director. He assumed his duties at a very tumultuous time for cities and towns of Massachusetts. The statewide tax limiting law, Proposition 2.5, was adopted in November of that year, imposing a cap on local expenditures at a time when the national inflation rate was 13.9%. The new law also mandated a complete revamping of municipal property assessment procedures to ensure properties were assessed at 100% full and fair market value. This was a challenging time in the town's history. By 1984, Tony succeeded in adapting the town's financial operations to the new situation and was able to elevate the town's bond rating to AAA, allowing Concord to join only 5 other Massachusetts communities with Moody's highest rating. It's been a core objective of his to maintain that high bond rating, and as a result, the town has saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in lower interest costs. Another core value Tony has exemplified during his service to the public, during his time here, is service to the public. This includes personalized assistance to those wishing to better understand a transaction. He also strives to transfer his knowledge to new members of the Finance Committee and new members of his staff. His knowledge of financial laws and regulations is encyclopedic. He loves to share information with anyone who shows any interest at all. His leadership Under his leadership, the Finance Department has won state and national awards for the Town Budget Book and the Finance Committee Report. His exemplary materials for tax assessment procedures and other complex fiscal matters have been models for other communities to use. Although he has on occasion expressed a regret that more people don't read those documents from cover to cover, there really is a lot of useful information in the budget book. Tony recognizes that the key to preserving the town's financial health is planning for future needs. He instituted a 5-year capital plan in the early 1990s as a way of anticipating the town's need to renovate buildings and purchase major new equipment. He has advocated for best practices in financial management, including maintaining free cash and reserves at appropriate levels, conservative budgeting, building long-term debt expenditures into the annual operating budget. He proposed creating stabilization funds for both the elementary school projects and the regional high school building project, funds utilized using available resources to help smooth out the peak tax impact during those years. He's not afraid to recommend reduced budgets when economic conditions warrant some retrenchment. Department heads and town staff kid him about being hard-nosed, but more often than not, he works with town committees and staff to help the departments achieve their objectives, though perhaps not taking the approach first suggested by the department head. He volunteered to serve as treasurer of the Minuteman-Neshoba Health Group, a joint purchasing consortium of 16 towns and school districts, which saved the town and employees thousands of dollars in lower health care expenses over the years. He can be a bit of a stickler, pointing out that there's no authority in state law to waive some fee or to create a new revolving fund, but his motive has always been protecting the well-being of Concord. Updating the finance director's job description recently filled 2 pages of major responsibilities Tony's position has been assigned over the years. Many people have joked that we will have to hire 2 people to perform the work that Tony's done. Early in my career, I tried to work as many hours as Tony did in the office, and it nearly killed me. To this day, as retirement approaches, he's not reduced the time that he spends on the job. His work ethic, honesty, and compassion set an extraordinary example for the rest of us working for the town. He does relax from time to time, here with his wife Mary on the left and some finance department staff. He makes connections with people that endure over time. He stays in touch with people that he's worked with over the years. He's a truly caring and compassionate person and has sympathy for anyone who falls on hard times. Smart, honest, hardworking, great sense of humor, humble, helpful to others. That's Tony LaGalbo. When linebacker Teddy Bruschi retired from the New England Patriots after an exemplary career and 3 championships, Coach Bill Belichick described Teddy with 2 words: perfect player. I would use 3 words to describe Tony LaGalbo: perfect public servant. Thank you very much, Tony, for your years of service.
Tony's wife is sitting in the visitor section, and we want to thank you for sharing him with us all these years. I'm not sure Chris said the number, 36 years. If you started at age 29 for a company and worked till you're 65, that's 36 years. Thank you, Tony. I would next like to recognize I'm sorry, it's Joanna Boynton. There she is.
I have to say my name and address? Joanna Boynton, 72 Chestnut Street, member of the school committee.
And I bet you're speaking for the school committee.
Oh, and speaking for the school committee.
Please proceed.
I've actually never done this before. Thank you. It's great to see everyone here. When I first met Kathy Snook, it's when I decided to run for school committee 3 years ago. I arrived at her house to introduce myself and talk about related school issues. I launched into all my reasons and qualifications for being a school committee member. You know, I have 4 children across 3 schools in the district. I have been PTG president. I'm a member of the school advisory committee for the last 3 years. I was a high school teacher and coach for 15 years. And it went on, and as the conversation continued, Kathy humbly mentioned she had 5 children, attended West Point in the first class of graduate women, taught math at West Point, served in the Army overseas, had a doctorate in education, taught at West Point, and I sunk lower and lower in my seat. What transpired over the next 3 years was a tremendous working relationship with someone who continued to teach me so much. Kathy is humble and extremely principled. She has a moral compass that guides her, and she has a level of commitment that is second to none. I had the privilege of working alongside someone who never made it about herself. Kathy's careful, she is thorough, and she is always guided by what is best for the students in our community, their families, the teachers, and the schools. If you attended our last school committee meeting, you would have heard without exception from her colleagues about her tireless work effort, her meticulous preparation, her tenacity and attention to detail is unmatched. And then you would have heard the gratitude of every single member. For one member said, and I quote, "Kathy is someone who does the right thing for the students. Her conclusions are not swayed by public perception, but a thorough vetting of the consequences of her decision. She has raised the bar by which I will measure myself as a school committee member." Another mentioned, "Never in my 10 years of being part of the school committee meetings or as a school committee member have I ever seen someone work as tirelessly as you." And finally, one member said, "She engenders the respect, admiration, and friendship of those with whom she works and serves." Kathy's list of accomplishments is impressive. She's responsible for much of the progress we have made as a committee. Kathy developed our communication goal on day 1 and has kept us true to reaching that goal each year. She spearheaded the community coffees in an effort to better our communication and transparency, and frankly, have a more intimate and honest conversation with our citizens. Last year, when the CPS budget was well over the FinCom guideline, she took the budget show on the road. She hosted and attended weekly and sometimes bi-weekly coffees to address the concerns about the budget. She single-handedly succeeded in getting the community's support. That was truly remarkable and great for our schools and our students. Kathy chaired the Calendar Advisory Committee to look at the options and preferences of many stakeholders regarding the school calendar. She sat on the Dignity Committee for 2 years, addressing the MassTel results at the K-8 level. She successfully negotiated a 3-year contract with the CCTA as a first-year school committee member. And really, the list goes on and on. But the impact that was strongest is her strength of character, her expertise and her smarts, and her humility along the way. I've learned what it means to work tirelessly until you get it right. I learned to listen to all perspectives and explain the decision made despite letting some down. I learned to commit yourself to excellence and be so thorough that you are bulletproof in your knowledge. For all these reasons, Kathy Snook set the bar for an exceptional school committee member who gave countless hours to our schools, our students, and our town. We have been so fortunate to have Kathy's expertise and dedication for the past 3 years. She will be sorely missed. Thank you, Kathy, for your dedication and commitment to our students, our school, and our town.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boynton. And now we'll hear from Alice Kaufman, Select Board Chair.
I'm Alice Kaufman, 1615 Lowell Road, member of the Select Board and speaking on their behalf.
Please proceed.
It is my privilege to say a few words of gratitude for Carmen Reese's 6 years on the Select Board. I first met Carmen when we served together on the Zoning Board of Appeals. Carmen's depth of knowledge and legal acumen were evident in the questions she asked petitioners, the intellectual rigor she applied to complicated cases, and the thoughtful and even-handed discussion she led among neighbors in an effort to reach consensus. One of Carmen's greatest attributes is that she knows how to listen, really listen. She gives respect and dignity to citizens' opinions and concerns, often on controversial issues. She doesn't race to conclusions without fully understanding the dimensions of the controversy and the emotions behind it. It's been an honor to serve with her on the Select Board for the past 3 years. Carmen is one amazing woman. She's committed to good governance, not to advance her own agenda, but rather to support an agenda for the common good. The Select Board benefited from her experience and training as an attorney. Just one example of her many contributions is how her keen insight helped the town navigate the complicated acquisition of the W.R. Graceland in Concord. Carmen is indefatigable. She is fully committed to each and every committee where she represents Concord. The Minuteman Vocational Technical School Committee is a good example of her tenacity. When negotiating an agreement among 16 member communities, it was clear that she worked both for the best outcome for Concord and for the district. Carmen displays passion for any issue that comes before her, and for any of the boards that she has served as liaison, which are many. I think it's 6 years with the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail for one, and that's quite an accomplishment, and that project is moving forward. She has raised the bar for elected officials and volunteers serving on our town boards and committees. Carmen has mentored me on this board, and I know that I'm the better for it. Thank you, Carmen, for your unwavering commitment, your personal integrity, your unbelievable work ethic, your love of chocolate, and your sense of humor. This board will miss your daily contributions, but I look forward to working with you in your new capacity as the first female town moderator of Concord.
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. And I'd now like to update you on where we are in the warrant.
Point of order, there's one more tribute.
Point of order.
Yeah, there's one more tribute.
Identify yourself, please.
Carmen Reese, 52 Devon Street, member of the Board of Selectmen, and speaking for the board and for all of us.
And Steve Ing, 12 Dalton Road, Select Board member.
Is this a coup? I guess, please proceed.
Thank you. 6 years
2 minutes, remember.
6 years in 60 seconds.
Sorry, we only have 30 seconds.
Okay, 2011.
Street lights.
Bottled water ban.
Did we get a second?
Formula business.
Farming bylaw.
Special town meeting within the annual town meeting.
West Concord Village District.
2012, bottled water ban.
Cat bylaw.
Did we get a second?
Citizens United resolution.
Special town meeting within the annual meeting.
W.R. Grace.
2013 special town meeting.
Repeal the bottled water ban.
School buses.
Annual town meeting.
Conserve the landfill.
Build a bus depot on the landfill.
Repeal the bottled water ban.
School buses.
2014 recall provision.
Town meeting ballot bylaw.
Fossil fuel divestment.
Marijuana zoning.
Dog bylaw.
Special town meeting within annual town meeting.
School buses.
Tobacco sales bylaw.
2015 town charter amendments.
Recall provision.
Water fluoridation.
Plastic bags.
Special town meeting within the annual meeting.
School buses.
W.R. Grace.
Starmet.
Artificial turf.
Last meeting in the old CCHS.
2016 special town meeting.
Minuteman amendments.
First town meeting in the new CCHS.
School buses.
Artificial turf.
We have a second.
Move to amend the amendment.
Will somebody call the question?
And here we are. I'm not done yet. Thank you, Mr. Ng. In 6 terms as moderator, Eric Van Loon has handled it all with grace, aplomb, and humor. That comes as no surprise given his impressive history of professional accomplishments and community service. Eric has counseled us to carry out the business of town meeting with purpose, mutual respect, and civility, and then delivered us gentle reminders when we have fallen out of line. He has He has immortalized Elise Woodward for her exhortation to be willing to risk changing your mind. Eric has given us time limits, listened to us complain about our time limits, confined us to our time limits, kept us focused, and moved us along. He has persuaded us that less is usually more. And he brought us the ding-ding of the little bell. Eric has spent hours with citizen petitioners and with citizens who wish to amend citizen petitions. He brought to bear his wealth of experience as a lawyer and mediator to effectively structure the presentation of competing views on controversial articles and to help committees and petitioners revise motions to effect an accommodation. Eric has given advance review to every town meeting PowerPoint presentation and let us know when no one would be able to figure out a proposed chart or read a proposed map or make sense out of the bullet points. I knew as a select board member how effectively Eric collaborated with the board to order the warrant, assemble the consent calendar, draft the final language of the motions, review town meeting presentations, and schedule high-interest articles. But I only understand now, as I prepare to take on Eric's job, exactly how hard and how well he has worked behind the scenes to organize and to safeguard the public responsibility and community experience that is town meeting. In the days leading up to town meeting, and since it has started, Eric has forwarded me upwards of 30 emails a day dealing with every manner of town meeting detail, again, with his characteristic grace, aplomb, and humor. Leading up to town meeting next year, at least one person will still be counting on Eric Van Loon to respond to emails and answer phone calls, and also to turn over his notebook. And now, Mr. Moderator, please allow us all to violate the no clapping rule, and thank you for a brilliant term of office as our moderator.
Thank you very much. Wise men. And very much looking forward to town meeting next year. Sticking to this year's warrant, let me give a quick update on where we are. And let me begin by sharing with you an interesting and perhaps heartening number. Last night, as I think we all know, there was challenging weather, and nonetheless, 325 voters were here and present and participating last night. Interestingly enough, that's more than came to the first meeting a year ago on a sunny Sunday afternoon in May. So it is perhaps a further indication of citizen commitment to town meeting, and perhaps the final nail in the coffin of the Sunday afternoon suggestion. Last night we did complete action on 39 out of the 59 warrant articles. That included our town and our school budgets, an agreement on a new senior tax relief home rule petition to send to the legislature. Tonight we're going to begin with Article 17 and 18, both dealing with the Minuteman Regional School. Then we'll continue in sequence, except that we did vote last night to take up CPC funding, which is Article 20, out of order, take it after Article 25. And the reason for that is because Articles 23 and 25 provide background for some of the provisions of the CPC items. As we start into our program, just a reminder, if you wish to speak this evening or offer an amendment, approach one of the numbered microphones, wait to be recognized. When you are called upon, state your name and your address, and then you'll be called upon. The time limits for this year, as in multiple years, are 2 minutes, and if you hear the bell, please end your sentence and conclude. A final word before we begin tonight's deliberation. Here on the podium in front of me is our town seal with our town motto, Quam firma res concordia. Translated roughly, it means how strong is harmony. We all know and remember that we're a town of many parts. Our traditional opening reflection that I recall gave last night includes the sentence, as we deliberate and vote, let us remember that the passions of the moment are not always the best guide for our conduct in the future, and we will remain neighbors after town meeting is over. I know we'll all conduct ourselves tonight so that by the end of this evening also, all of the parts of our community will retain our sense of harmony. And so we now commence tonight's business with Article 17. This is the Minuteman Regional High School budget. It's found in the FinCom report on page 78. And the motion, Ms. Flood moves that the town raise and appropriate Concord's apportioned share of the Minuteman Career and Technical School District Assessment, $423,444 for this coming fiscal year. Is there a second? I see there is.
Before you start the clock, I would like to say that I was a political science major at BU during the turbulent late 60s, early 70s, but I probably learned more about the relationship between public policy and finance in the first hour on the finance committee with Tony than I did in 4 years at BU.
Please proceed.
He knew everything then, too.
Yes.
Okay. I am Carrie Flood, 1289 Main Street. I am Concord's representative to the Minuteman School Committee and chair of its finance subcommittee. Kevin Mahoney, who is our assistant superintendent for finance, is here to answer questions in case there are any on this article or the next that I can't respond to. Okay. Concord was an original member of the Minuteman region, formed in the 1970s to assist towns in their obligation to provide access to vocational education. That obligation continues today under the same oversight and regulation by the Department of Secondary and Elementary Education that rides herd over all of our other public schools. Minuteman students follow a rigorous program of academic study but each also selects a concentration leading to certification in one of 16 career or technical majors. And we offer a wide range of extracurricular activities with very high participation rates. Graduates must pass the MCAS exams, most doing so at the proficient or higher level on their first attempt. And with 50% of our student body typically arriving with an IEP in hand, our post-graduation placement stats are even more impressive. Special education at Minuteman speaks not to a student's ability, but to the way he or she learns best, and success in a very hands-on setting in an area that truly interests them builds confidence and skills that they will carry with them into adult life. Our number one priority remains support for the educational needs of our students. However, we have chosen to level fund some budget lines and will add to instructional equipment only where essential or transferable to the new building. For instance, we were recently honored to receive a $500,000 grant from the state that will be used for state-of-the-art manufacturing equipment. It will be put in place immediately, but will be later relocated to the new facility. We have also begun to downsize our staff to reflect a gradual and very deliberate transition to a smaller student enrollment consistent with our future plans. Nevertheless, like any school district, we do have certain obligations for which funding must be provided. Our area of greatest exposure concerns building conditions. We will encumber some funds from the current year's budget to complete critical work over the summer. Where capital funds are spent in FY17 depends heavily on whether the building project moves forward. And whatever the outcome, the budget is planned to reserve a reasonable E&D balance, also known as free cash. You've likely heard something about Minuteman's in-district versus out-of-district enrollments, and both have varied over time. As this slide indicates, however, increases in total assessments to member communities have averaged a modest 1.3% over the past several years. If you are a faithful follower of Concord's town meeting or read the Concord Journal, you know that in addition to planning for a new building, we have recently adopted a new governing agreement, and that membership will be aligned. The green dots on this map are the 10 towns that have chosen to remain, and the red dots will be departing, but not yet. Those 6 red dot towns will still be members for the next year and will pay their annual assessments just like the rest of us. Minuteman's total budget will actually decrease for FY17, with only a slight increase in total member assessments. There are a lot of numbers on this slide, and I'd ask you to focus on the decrease in instructional services, which is due to having fewer students. The proposed budget also anticipates spending less on the current facility, but we would begin paying debt on borrowing related to the new building. The only major change in revenue related to is related to out-of-district student tuitions. This is in part due to fewer such students being accepted, but also because of a decrease in the base tuition that may be charged for out-of-district students. This is set annually, not by Minuteman, but by the State Commissioner of Education. Concord's budget share is based on the number of students we send to Minuteman, and you can see here that that's changed quite a bit from one year to another. Under the old agreement, 1 year's enrollment would determine the next year's assessment, and we were prepared for a real bump. Because the revised agreement uses a 4-year rolling average, however, we recalculated in March, and the impact that Concord might have seen has been moderated. Tonight, we seek your approval for Concord's assessment in the amount of $423,444. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you. The floor is now open for discussion of Article 17, this year's Minuteman Regional Technical High School budget. Seeing no one at any of the mics in the cafeteria or here in this room, it appears that we are ready to come to a vote All those who are in favor of Article 17, this year's Minuteman budget, please raise your colored voting slips. Thank you very much. Those who are opposed, please raise yours. I see that it is near unanimous in the cafeteria and also here in this room. So Article 17 passes by an overwhelming majority. We move on then to Article 18, which also deals with Minuteman Regional High School. The warrant article and the description, again, is on page 78 in the Finance Committee report. And is there a second for the motion that we approve Article 18? I see there is.
Okay.
Ms. Flood?
Yes, I am still Carrie Flood. I still live at 1289 Main Street, and I'm still representative to the school committee and chair of its finance committee.
And you may proceed again.
Thank you. The project presented for your approval tonight may have undergone the longest and most complex process of review and compromise of any public high school in the state. We even took time along the way to rework the formal agreement that defines the district's membership, governance, and assessment models, and appreciate your support of that endeavor. The design enrollment of 628 is smaller than the current student population, and the square footage is much smaller than the current building. Both have been determined with serious consideration for an enhanced educational program that will address the interests of students and potential employers in the area we serve. The financials have also been the subject of intense scrutiny, but more on that later. The primary goal of any school building project must be to facilitate student life and learning in a way that the current building cannot. In fact, while this project has been in the planning, the district has spent, and we, you and I, have helped pay for, over $7 million in building improvements that were just to keep that facility operational. All of this work was urgent, and some, in the opinion of the Lexington building inspector, would have justified shutting down sections of the building had they not been addressed. The proposed building will be located on land already owned by the district, shown on the left-hand side of this slide, and will be designed to adapt to existing characteristics and contours of the property. Construction methods and materials have been selected to serve a minimum of 50 years. Education will continue in the existing building while construction is underway, saving both elapsed time and money. Although the new school will shift over the line into Lincoln, access will still be through Lexington, and most municipal services will continue to be provided by that town. The new building is designed to accommodate a career academy model with related specialties located in proximity to one another. Here you see the various areas of concentration listed under Engineering, Construction, and Trades on the left, with the Life Sciences and Services Academy detailed on the right. In between are the shared academic, administrative, and student support programs, a concept that is reflected in the design of the physical building. The Minuteman faculty have been deeply involved in determining what this new layout will look like, but more importantly, how it will function. Where feasible, some adaptations are already being put in place. Here is the first of several images of what the new building will look like. You can see the three major building segments as the land slopes somewhat uphill from left to right. Inside, lab spaces will support areas of technical study that were not even conceived as relevant to vocational education when the current building was designed. Minuteman has been a true leader in implementing these programs at the high school level. Workshops will meet industry standards, both in terms of equipment and occupational safety, and will be designed as adaptable as career and employer expectations continue to evolve. Natural light in all classrooms. Because of the way the existing building was laid out, one big rectangular hulk. That is not the case today. The new school will continue to offer many services to the public, managed and staffed by students with supervision by specifically licensed adult faculty. There will be spaces for small groups to meet and larger, more open spaces for students to gather. As I said at the outset, this has been a long and rigorous process, with options examined inside and out, occasionally turned fully upside down, and the final design has benefited immensely by constructive criticism all along the way. I want to point out that Carmen Reese and Frank Cannon, who is up here, both served on that building committee for many years. The effort has been worth it, validated by the unanimous vote of the Massachusetts School Building Authority's Board of Directors to invest significant state funds to make it a reality. That board, by the way, is chaired by the state treasurer and includes the former state inspector general, as well as several high-level construction professionals. And the CEO is Maureen Valenti, who some of you may remember was an assistant to Tony LaGalbo early in her career right here in Concord. It was early in Tony's career also. They know their stuff, and they don't take decisions like this lightly. The question we all need answered. But first we must understand, as the MSBA does, it costs more to design and construct a vocational technical high school. We are building a complete academic school and career teaching spaces that parallel the real-life work environment. Nevertheless, competition for state funds is stiff, and reimbursement for some important elements is strictly limited or just not allowed, and hard choices did have to be made. For instance, development of new playing fields on the footprint of the old building will only be included if money is saved elsewhere or an alternate source of funds is identified. There have been relatively few comparable projects in recent years, in part because the costs are so significant. Also, vocational districts tend to serve several member communities, making it more difficult to achieve consensus around major spending and debt decisions. These projects vary in size and the range of programs offered, but all were designed to meet the MSBA's strict guidelines, and Minuteman's total cost per square foot is well in line. So, the project may not and will not exceed $144.9 million, of which the state's pledged investment, representing the highest rate allowed for reimbursement of eligible costs, will cover up to $44.1 million. It could be less if the total cost is less. By the way, the effective rate of 30.5% is actually almost exactly equal to what Concord Carlisle got for its recent project in the building we're in tonight. We will be the first vocational district to benefit from a new state regulation that supports a capital fee to the sending community for out-of-district students, but it only applies when the project is associated with MSBA funding. As defined in that regulation, the fee will be essentially equal to the average per-student share of annual debt. The share of building costs that will ultimately be borne by an individual taxpayer will vary primarily due to the number of students a particular town sends to Minuteman over time. For Concord, even in Tony LaGalbo's characteristically cautious estimate, the annual property tax impact is expected to fall in the lower half of that scale. We are now in the approval phase that MSBA has said we must wrap up no later than June 30th, or lose the pledge of state funding it took so long to obtain. As noted in the warrant and the motion, a positive vote tonight will still be contingent upon a vote at the polls, scheduled for April 14th, to exclude Concord's share of the debt from our levy limit. It is possible that another member town may fail to pass the warrant article at their town meeting, or may fail to support a debt exclusion if one is applicable within their own community. If that occurs, the Minuteman School Committee retains the option by law of calling a district-wide election. If that occurs, it would be in mid-June and would be decided by a simple majority. When finally approved, We will move into the last stages of preparation and put the project out to bid with a plan to open the doors in September of 2020. Please join me in voting yes.
Thank you very much. And we will now hear recommendations from both the Select Board and the Finance Committee on this article.
Carmen Reese, 52 Devon Street, member of the Select Board and the Minuteman School Building Committee, and speaking for the Select Board.
Please proceed.
Thank you. The Select Board unanimously recommends affirmative action on Article 18. We make this recommendation first because we believe the benefits provided to Concord by Minuteman Voc Tech are worth maintaining. Second, because we have studied the new building proposal and found it to be sound and reasonable. And third, because we have examined the alternatives to the proposed new building and find them unacceptable. Let me start with the alternatives to the proposal before us. The first option would be to renovate the existing obsolete, deteriorated, and oversized building without state aid at roughly the same cost to the district as the proposed project, $100 million. The end result would not fully support Minuteman's educational program, and it certainly could not be expected to last for 50 years. The second option would be to close the school and dispose of the real estate if the State Department of Education would permit us to do so. Closure of Minuteman would leave the original 16 communities that formed the district searching for open seats for their students in vocational technical schools in other districts with no guarantee of finding them. We do not consider either of these alternatives to be reasonable or responsible. That said, we still would not recommend approval of the proposed project if we did not believe it to be a sound and appropriate one. The new building proposal has been rigorously vetted. Our owner's project manager, the design construction professionals on the school committee, and the Massachusetts School Building Authority have scrutinized and modified the design. The owner's project manager has certified the budget, and perhaps most importantly, the state has approved the project design and budget and committed to fund it. We've looked closely at the projected capital assessments to district communities. The projections necessarily rest on assumptions, and we recognize that actual experience could vary from assumptions, for example, in Concord's enrollment numbers. But the potential for variation is, again, reasonable. Finally, we believe that the model of experiential learning that Minuteman Vocational Technical High School offers to Concord's high school and post-high school students is a valuable one, and it will be even more valuable in a state-of-the-art facility. For all of these reasons, the Select Board recommends affirmative action on Article 18.
Thank you, Ms. Reese. And now we'll hear the recommendation of the Finance Committee. And after that, the floor will be open to discussion on the merits of Article 18.
Richard Giles, 36 Spring Road, member of the Finance Committee and speaking on behalf of the Finance Committee.
Mr. Giles.
Thank you. The Concord Finance Committee also unanimously recommends affirmative action on Article 18. We believe that Minuteman Regional Technical High School offers Concord students a valuable alternative to Concord Carlisle Regional High School that broadens the students' educational experience to include the development of vocational and technical skills along with academics. We also recognize that undertaking a project such as this is extremely complex, and in Minuteman's case is exacerbated by the fact that it is dealing with a district now of 10 communities. We also examine the various alternative paths, and we also examine the various assumptions used in the behind the costs of the program. We have spent considerable time over the last 18 months looking at this, and we believe it's important for Concord to understand the likely impact of the project, but also equally believe it is important for Concord to support this project. As Carmen mentioned, the cost to Concord taxpayers will ultimately be driven by enrollment, both from Concord and in total. the final nature of the capital reimbursement from out-of-district students, and of course the final cost and related MSBA reimbursement. We have looked at this using an average of approximately 22 students. Today's enrollment was 15, as you saw. An assumption of $1.4 million of reimbursed capital costs from out-of-district students. And with that, we estimate the 2020 impact when the school is open to the median Concord single-family residential tax bill to be approximately 0.35% or $40. We believe these are reasonable assumptions, and thus join the Select Board in recommending affirmative action on Article 18. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giles. So again, the motion before us, Article 18, is to approve the overall $144 million budget for the construction of a new regional high school. This is Concord being one of the member communities voting in favor, and this would be our approval, though, would be subject next week, in fact, to a vote at the polls of the town for a Proposition 2.5, a debt exclusion referendum vote. Are there voters who would like to be heard on Article 18? Seeing no one approaching microphones in the cafeteria or here in this room, it appears again we're ready to take a vote. All those who are in favor of Article 18, please raise your colored voting slips. All those who are opposed, please raise yours. A 2/3 vote is required, and actually it's not on this matter, but it's near unanimous in each of the rooms and collectively. So it is our vote to approve warrant article number 18. The next warrant article is number 20, but as I explained before, we are taking that up after Article 25. So the next one that we will consider at this point is warrant article 23, which is land acquisition on Balls Hill Road.
Mr. Moderator, Chris Whalen, Town Manager.
Let me ask if there is a second for this motion. I see that there is. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 23 requests that the town allocate a total of $2 million to purchase 80 acres of land off Balls Hill Road using a combination of funds from the General Fund, the Water Enterprise Fund, and Community Preservation Act funding. The property is shown here on this map where the arrow is pointing. Balls Hill Road is located off Monument Street, about 2.5 miles from Concord Center. The land in question is located adjacent to water supply land and includes more than a mile of frontage on the Concord River. This aerial photo shows the site in greater detail. The seller of the property owns a total of 218 acres in the area. She's offering for sale the 80 acres shown here in light green. The land in the center, shown in yellow, is 17 acres the town acquired in 2001 for water supply purposes. The parcel with the yellow stripes is not offered for sale, but has a conservation restriction on it, limiting future development to one building lot. The seller will retain ownership of the remaining 138 acres. This land is a portion of a larger open space holding. The seller has decided to sell this 80 acres and has offered it for sale first to the town, but will put it on the open market if the town does not acquire it. The property, again, has more than 5,500 feet of frontage along the river and surrounds on three sides the 17 acres the town purchased for water supply purposes. The land has been identified in the 2015 Open Space and Recreation Plan as a property of significant conservation interest. The town has partnered with the Concord Land Conservation Trust to try to preserve this open space. The land is a mixture of wetlands and upland and therefore provides rich habitat for a diversity of wildlife. The ornithologist William Brewster purchased the property more than 100 years ago to save it from development. So his connection with the property adds an aspect of historical interest to the acquisition. We commissioned an independent appraisal of the value of the property, which was performed by John Avery Associates and is dated March 25th of this year. The 80-acre parcel is currently a portion of a larger 110-acre parcel, so the appraiser had to estimate the assessed value of the property and did so at $6.9 million. The appraisal concluded that, assuming the seller could develop a 5-lot PRD, or planned residential development, on the site, the property has a value of $7 million. This slide shows the seller's original asking price in December of 2015 at $6.9 million. The seller later agreed to reduce the asking price to $6.4 million. The funding requested under Article 23, shown here, is $2 million from the town, leaving a balance of $4.4 million to be raised through private donations by the Land Trust. That private fundraising is currently underway. The $2 million in funding from the town would take the form of $800,000 from the general fund as part of our normal capital spending plan, together with $800,000 in borrowing from the water fund based on an increased protection for the water supply well that will be located in the future on the adjoining land. And finally, $400,000 in Community Preservation Act funding has been proposed under the open space allocation. There are not many large undeveloped parcels, 80 acres or in size, remaining in Concord, particularly with the unique attributes that this property has. There is an existing network of trails on the property shown in yellow. It would be the Select Board's intention to develop a small parking area on the property to accommodate public access for hiking and passive recreation. Raising more than $4 million to complete this purchase will be a significant challenge for the Land Trust, but the preservation effort will pass a major milestone tonight if the town signals its support for the purchase. I urge your favorable action on Article 23.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. And again, we will have recommendations explained by both the Select Board and the Finance Committee. By the way, this matter is found on page 81 in the Finance Committee report.
Mike Lawson, 1695 Lowell Road, member of the Select Board and speaking for the board.
Mr. Lawson.
Good evening. With the purchase of the proposed acreage on Balls Hill Road, the town continues its rich history of open space and conservation protection. This is truly a unique opportunity. The property is a magnificent 80 acres, including over a mile of frontage on the Concord River, linking trails at either end for a continuous river trail system. The opportunity to purchase the land is a joint effort, with funds provided from borrowing from the Water Fund, the Community Preservation Committee assessment, and the generous support of the Concord Land Conservation Trust. This property also abuts land previously purchased by the town, and this acquisition and the contribution from the Water Fund adds needed wellhead protection for Concord's future drinking water supply. It is expected, as the town manager said, that if the land is acquired, steps will be taken to create parking to facilitate access for residents to enjoy this land. And finally, the board will in the near future bring about an assessment of the physical and financial feasibility of finding appropriate uses and a home for the historic Ball Benson House and barn on town property. The Select Board voted unanimously to recommend to town meeting affirmative action on Article 23. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. And now for the Finance Committee.
Pat Nelson, 52 Cottage Lane, Finance Committee, speaking on behalf of the Finance Committee.
Ms. Nelson.
Thank you. The Finance Committee recommends affirmative action on Article 23. This article offers the unique opportunity for the town to acquire, through a partnership with the Concord Land Conservation Trust, property that will support the long-term sustainability of the town's water supply and provide a long-desired conservation and recreation asset for the town. The location and size of the property, adjacent to 17 acres purchased by the town in 2001 for water supply purposes, will assure the town can meet the Department of Environmental Protection's required 400-foot well protection radius and provide additional flexibility should there be the need in the future to relocate the wellheads or add additional satellite wellheads. This is an excellent opportunity to assure our future water supply. Finance Committee urges you to support this article.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. And I've been asked by other town boards to announce positions. The Planning Board, the Public Works Committee, and the Natural Resources Commission all support Article 23. So the floor is now open for discussion. 23, which is authorizing the Select Board to approve the acquisition of these 80 acres on Balls Hill Road, bonding issues of $1.6 million, and this is subject to a 2/3 vote requirement. Microphone number 1.
John Stevens, 26 Simon Willard Road, speaking on behalf of the Concord Land Trust.
Mr. Stevens.
The property that's the subject of this article has long been among the highest priorities of both the town and the land trust for conservation. It has virtually every attribute that you would look for in conservation land. Along this mile of riverfront, a line of glacial eskers rises from the bank. From the top of these hills, there are lovely views both across the river and into the land over vernal pools, ponds, wetlands. As was mentioned by Chris, this topographical diversity has created wonderful wildlife habitat, all of it documented by decades of ornithological observations by William Brewster, because this property is where Brewster's historic October farm meets the Concord River. And as was shown on the slide, there is already a network of excellent hiking trails on the property. It would be hard to think of a more pleasant prospect for spending a day in Concord than a float down the river followed by a walk and a picnic on Balls Hill, which is precisely the way that Thoreau began the journey he wrote about in A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. If we acquire that land, this experience will be available to all of us. As was shown in the slide, the property is being offered to the land trust in the town at a bargain sale price of $6.4 million. The slide also showed that there is a gap between the town's proposed contribution and that price of more than $4 million. The land trust is now engaged in attempting to bridge that gap through private donations. The generous response we've received from our solicitations of leadership gifts has made us optimistic. But converting optimism to success is going to require more generosity from more of us. As the fundraising effort broadens, you will be hearing from us.
On that note,
also crucial to this 10 seconds to the preservation of this property is approval of the authorization sought in this article. Please vote for Article 23. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Are there other speakers who wish to be heard on Article 23? Seeing no one at any of the microphones, I think we're ready to come to a vote. All those in favor of Article 23, please raise your colored voting slips. Thank you very much. All those who are opposed, please raise yours. I see that it's, I believe, unanimous in the cafeteria and near unanimous here. And so we have very easily achieved the 2/3 vote required. We come next then to Article 25, which deals with cemetery roadway infrastructure at Sleepy Hollow. Information on this is found in page 82 of the Finance Committee report. The motion is whether the town will vote to raise and appropriate available funds, $150,000 for these improvements at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. Is there a second for this motion? I see that there is.
Paul Cook, 27 Bedford Court.
Mr. Cook.
Mr. Moderator. Good evening. My name is Paul Cook. I'm a representative of the Cemetery Committee. Article 25 requests the town meeting approval for an appropriation of $157,393 for a portion of Phase 1 of a roadway infrastructure and drainage improvement project within Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. The next slide, please. The background to this is that the roadways and the walls in the cemetery are, some of them are in disrepair and in very bad shape. And we propose a multi-phase approach to addressing this infrastructure need in the cemetery. Based on funding constraints and other competing projects for limited CPA funding, we expect that the project will require further CPA and debt funding requests in the future. So this is just the first phase of the project. The next slide. This is a picture of, you can't see it very well, I'm sorry, the Melvin Memorial, which is at the heart of the cemetery. Proper management of stormwater is important in a cemetery like ours. It's a historic place. Emerson did the dedication speech in 1855. It was not just to be a place to memorialize those who've passed, but a place for the revival and for the inspiration of those who are living. And at the current state of the roads and the walls, it is in need of repair. So the Concord Public Works is currently in the design phase of the first part of the renovation of the roads to ensure that the cemetery will be a very usable source and an attractive place for tourists as well in the future. And next slide. This is a map of the roads that has been developed by the Concord Public Works, and it shows in different colors the state of the roads in the cemetery. The eastern part of the cemetery, which is, as you face it, the part on your right, which is the part furthest from town, and it is the area of red and yellow. The roads are in disrepair. The red indicates the poorest condition. Asphalt will need to be removed and improved base materials installed prior to repaving. Then the yellow areas are also in poor condition. Asphalt will need to be removed prior to repaving there. Then the roads in green are in fair condition and can be overlaid with a half inch with some asphalt. And then the blue roads are in good condition, and they'll just need preventative maintenance as we go forward. So the first phase of the project will address the areas in red and yellow on the right side, that is the eastern side of the cemetery. And also in dealing with the walls that are in disrepair. The next slide will show, this is the road that most people use when they are on the way to see Artist Ridge, where Emerson and the Hawthorns and Thoreau and the Alcotts are buried. There's a lot of traffic there. It's one of the major tourist sites in our town. And the road, because of the process of thawing and freezing water, is really coming apart right there. And the wall on the other slide, you can see, the wall is also in a dangerous state of disrepair. So the first phase of the project will be to address this area, as you saw on the map, in red and in yellow. So finally, we just would like to ask the town to support this effort to renovate and maintain one of the major sites in our town. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been asked to announce that the Public Works Committee also supports this article. The floor is then now open for discussion of Article 25, which provides for a total of $157,000 for repair, construction, and renovation of roadways at Sleepy Hollow, with the itemization there of current funds that would be used toward that and the provision of $50,000 additional borrowing. This would require a 2/3 vote. Seeing no one at microphones or approaching microphones in either of the rooms, all those who are in favor, please raise your colored voting slips. Thank you very much. All those who are opposed, please raise yours. I see that it's near unanimous in each room, so the 2/3 vote requirement vote is easily achieved, and that is affirmative action taken by the meeting tonight. We will now go back to warrant article number 20, which we skipped over, but which also has portions that include the Balls Hill property and the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. The article is found in the FinCom report on pages 79 and 80, and the motion moves that we take affirmative action as written in the warrant. Is there a second for this? I see that there is.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Booja Cookman, Chair of the Community Preservation Committee, 94 Hubbard Street. I'd like to begin my presentation by touching on some noteworthy Concord CPA trends and highlights, and then go ahead and present the final 2016 CPC funding recommendations. In the 10 years since the town adopted the Community Preservation Act, we've raised over $15.5 million through a combination of 70% from our local property tax surcharge and 30% from state matching funds. Concord is now one of 160 Massachusetts towns, which represents 45% of all towns in the Commonwealth, who have joined since CPA was enacted in 2000. So on an absolute dollar basis, the state match is on a downward trend for us as more towns adopt the CPA. For example, in fiscal year 07, Concord received $700,000 from the state, and in fiscal year 11, Concord received $230,000 from the state, drop of over 2/3 over 4 years. Next. While our state amount portion has been dropping, Concord has not moved to increase the 1.5% surcharge to maintain to the maximum 3%, which is allowed. But it is worth noting that 50% of the 160 towns have adopted the maximum property tax surcharge of 3%, which means that they will receive a higher percentage match than we will. In 2016, Concord's surcharge will amount to approximately $146 per median resident property tax bill. The CPA Act does not restrict funding to town-only projects, and over the 10 years, the CPC has allocated 68% of the funds towards 54 town projects and 32% of the funds on 23 nonprofit projects. I remind you, as I go through this, some of the great projects the surcharge has enabled. It's really stretched far and very exciting. Slide 5. By law, the CPC must allocate at least 10% of our annual funding to 3 categories, either through projects or into our reserves. The first is community housing, which has received 23% of CPC funding over the past 10 years. The second category is historic preservation, which has received 23% of overall CPC funding over the past 10 years. The third required category is open space, and open space has received 15% over the past 10 years. Recreation projects are allowed but not required, and certain restrictions do apply to those. In the recreation category, it's received 23% since 2005. So let's go ahead and move on to what we're going to be asking you to vote on tonight. In terms of our funding this year for 2016, funding amounts to a little over $1.3 million based on a combination of the surcharge and the state match. Our committee was pretty overwhelmed this year. We had $5.4 million in requests. I think you've heard from the cemetery situation that we had far more applications than we could fund. Over $3.7 million that we couldn't fund. So by reaching into our land acquisition and housing reserve funds set aside in previous years, the CPC is just over $1.7 million available to allocate in 2016. We made all the applicants aware of the difficult funding situation, and to stretch the dollars, we asked for multi-phased approaches and to find additional funding sources wherever they could, and some worthy projects were not able to be funded at all. So for 2016, the board is recommending $1.48 million be allocated across 16 different projects. Where you see a 2, that means there are 2 projects in those in categories, open space and recreation. We're going to have about $74,000 left in our reserve accounts. So we'll move on to the actual projects. Next slide. And you'll note that the yellow indicates the amount that in this category the CPC is funding. The first is in community housing, and we are funding the Create a Shared Affordable Housing Administration resource that rotates annually between 7 towns. Split that with a town. CPC has allocated $17.5 for that. And the second one in community housing is $120,000 to add to the Affordable Housing Buy-Down Program, which gives CHDC $300,000 in total to buy a unit to add to affordable housing stock and the ability to react quickly if a new item comes on the market. The third is $82,500 to fund Community Housing Reserve Fund to enable future funding for future projects like the Junction Village. Moving on to historic preservation category, the CPC is funding $138,250 to the Emerson Umbrella Window Restoration Project for phases 1 and 2 to replace their 100 aging, leaky, cracked windows that were installed in 1929 with new energy-efficient insulated windows. Each phase will be approximately 50 windows, and it will be over 2 years. And we're funding the first of the 2 years. As you've just heard, Article 25, the CPC is allocating $225,000 to the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery roadway and stone wall improvements. We could not fund their entire request, hence the project before us. Next. For the third historic preservation project, the town of Concord cut back the original request to help preserve the Weirll Harrington 1745 farmhouse to what was deemed the minimum amount of $40,000 to be used for roof masonry and framing and draining. Next. The new Church of West Concord originally requested over $42,000 to restore the large original steps to the original brickwork and slate of this historic 1903 church. They were able to go back and raise over $30,000 from other sources. CPC is funding $12,000, and the improvements will be visible to all, and one of the conditions is public access at least twice annually. And moving on to open space category, which is the blue-green, we're funding 100% restoration for the largest population of the rare Britain's violet by removing buckthorn and other invasive species in the old calf pasture. The second open space project funds another 3 years, a plan to remove buckthorn and invasive species, this time from Gowing Swamp, partially to improve the view from a desired future viewing station to be built at the Concord's Children's Center sometime in the future. CPC and Sudbury Valley Trust are co-funding the project. Here, CPC is splitting funding between recreation and open space and allocating $62,000 plus to each. It's for 100% completion of the design phase of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail from Comm Ave to Sudbury Town Line, and Concord will be at risk of losing DOT's state match if it's not funded in 2016, and you'll be hearing more about that later on town meeting. This is the second project split between open space, $124,000, and recreation, $41,000, and it's to implement the recommendations made by the White Pond Watershed Maintenance Plan for erosion controls on town land adjacent to the pond and the state boat launch. Moving to the recreation category, the applicant for the USS Concord Bell Memorial Restoration found additional resources to help fund the redesign of the somewhat eyesore of a billboard and resting area in Concord Center with the USS Concord Bell as a centerpiece. The USS Concord was decommissioned in the 1940s, and the bell is currently in the townhouse basement. Next in the recreation category is Concord on Tap, and the town of Concord have been working together very closely to plan the installation of 6 new water fountains with water bottle filling capacity at playing fields at Alcott, Ripley, Sanborn, Thoreau, Willard, and South Meadow Field. They were able to find alternative funding and reduce the request from $62,000 to $24,500 as indicated here. $150,000 is earmarked to fund the new natural grass multipurpose playing field for phase 3 of Concord Carlisle Play. And CPC's contribution to the Balls Hill land acquisition for open space, previously described in Article 23, you heard, is $150,000 from our reserve fund and is allocating $250,000 from our 2016 funding to support this very, very exciting opportunity for the town. Finally, we recommend keeping our amazing staff supported and supplied with what's become a regular annual contribution from our funding of $30,000 a year. Thank you all for your attention. And I move we support it.
Thank you.
I did it under.
Very well. Thank you, Ms. Cookman. So 6 other town boards and committees have weighed in with all with favorable recommendations for action on this item. This includes the Select Board, the Planning Board, Public Works Committee, Natural Resources Commission, and the School Committee, and the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Advisory Committee is supporting item J. So the total motion is for affirmative action on projects that total just under $1.5 million divided into 16 separate items as described. So the floor is now open for further discussion of Article 20. Seeing no one approaching microphones in the cafeteria. Oops, I'm sorry, the cafeteria, microphone 1. Please identify yourself.
Hi, Ellie Garvey, 25 Damon Street.
Ms. Garvey.
Just a question. I support it, but just a quick question. Maybe I missed it. It was the drinking water fountains at the playing fields. Was Rideout Field included in that? I didn't see it. Just wondered. Thanks.
Could you respond? Please come back to the... I'm hearing that the answer is you don't know?
I think there's already fountains there, so I don't think it is.
So there are signals that there are already 2 drinking fountains at Rideout, and so apparently there are no additional funds in this particular motion provided for that. Are there any other questions or clarifications or statements pro or con? If not, all those who are in favor of Article 20, please raise your colored ballots. Thank you. All who are opposed, please raise yours. I see again it's near unanimous in both rooms, and so it is a motion and with favorable action by town meeting tonight. We will come then, because Articles 26 and 27 were approved last night on the consent calendar, to Article 28, and this is on page 83 in the Finance Committee report. And the motion is to take affirmative action on Article 28 as printed in the warrant. It's the sum of $1.35 million from borrowing or other funds, and a 2/3 vote is required on this matter because of the borrowing. Is there a second? I see that there is.
I'm Arthur Fullman, 64 Nurse Neck Hill Road, Concord. I am a member of the Public Works Commission, and I am speaking for the Public Works Commission.
Mr. Fullman.
Thank you. The $16,500,000 debt authorization being requested tonight will provide funding for construction and engineering services for 3 major components of Concord's drinking water system. The first and largest portion will fund construction of upgrades to the Nagog Pond water treatment facility. This will significantly increase the resilience of Concord's water supply and allow Concord to provide over 1 million gallons per day of reliable, high-quality water to its customers. The second major element of this funding request is for replacement of the Nagog Pond raw water intake pipeline. This pipeline extends approximately 1,400 feet from the Nagog Pond Dam Gatehouse into Nagog Pond. The dam and pipeline were originally constructed in the early 1900s. The third and final part of this funding request is for rehabilitation of Concord's 2.5 million gallon Nurse Neck Hill reservoir tank, along with minor upgrades to the 5 million gallon Pine Hill reservoir tank. Next slide. Here's some history. After the drought of 1883, Concord petitioned the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for water rights to Nagog Pond. This legislation was contained in Chapter 201 of the Acts of 1884. Upon approval of this legislation in April 1884, these water rights were accepted at the November 1884 Concord Town Meeting. After years of planning and land acquisition, water began flowing from Nagog Pond to Concord in September 1909. Nagog Pond was Concord's main source of supply until a growing community required development of additional groundwater supplies in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Next slide, please. In 1989, the federal surface water treatment rules were promulgated, requiring all surface water supplies to be filtered. Concord was one of 13 water suppliers in Massachusetts to receive a waiver due to the high quality of the water in Nagog Pond. In 1996, an ozone-enhanced disinfection facility was constructed. Based on increased regulatory challenges, this facility is now outdated. Use of this supply has been significantly reduced and has been limited to operation only during peak summer demand hours. Today, the Nagog Pond supply is one of very few unfiltered surface water supplies allowed in this country. Maintaining a federal waiver is difficult and compromises Concord's ability to depend on Nagog Pond as a filtration plant for many years. The significant capital cost has also been planned for well over a decade, and our current rate structure, with annual increases of 3 to 4%, anticipates and supports this expenditure. Over the past 3 years, treatability studies and piloting have been performed and approved by the Mass DEP to evaluate the state-of-the-art technology that will be used in this project. Preliminary design has taken place to identify construction and operational costs. The project team is currently working through a fairly complex set of state and local permits. Next slide, please. This slide is a photograph of the existing ozone treatment facility. Next slide. This is an aerial image showing the existing site and structures outlined in yellow, with the new facility footprint shaded in red. The existing structure has a footprint of 1,300 square feet, approximately 30 feet by 45 feet. The new facility, which includes a second floor, will have a footprint of 7,600 square feet, approximately 55 by 125 feet. There are several site constraints. The preliminary design and layout has been modified to reduce impacts on site with consideration for the environment and abutters. Next slide, please. The new water treatment facility shown in this slide will house pumps to convey water from Nagog Pond to the facility, a pre-oxidation system, state-of-the-art dissolved air flotation, intermediate ozone treatment, carbon filtration, conditioning with standard water treatment chemicals, underground vaults for handling processed water, and solids management equipment to allow for off-site disposal. This treatment regime is much more complex than the current ozone facility, but will allow for year-round water supply. As would be expected, more treatment will require more energy. Public Works staff and our team of design experts have been evaluating demand management and alternative energy options, including solar, distributed energy, and cogeneration, to reduce operating costs and maintain low water rates. Next slide, please. The current cast iron intake pipe, which extends along the bottom of Nagog Pond, was installed in 1909 and has a 16-inch diameter. Over the past 100-plus years, the inside effective diameter of this pipe has been reduced to approximately 8 inches. This has greatly limited the amount of water that can be drawn from Nagog Pond at any given time and must be replaced in order to increase yield. A Nurse Neck Reservoir, shown on the next slide, in the center of the photo on the right is a 2.5 million gallon tank constructed in the early 1900s to provide water pressure and fire protection to the higher elevations in town. In the 1970s, it was refurbished by adding a conical concrete slab base along with an aluminum geodesic cover. As seen in the next slide, taken inside of the reservoir, it needs quite a bit of repair. The debt authorization will provide funding to perform the necessary maintenance to the tank, as well as improvements for protective screening. A small amount of the funds will also be used for the Pine Hill Reservoir, located in Lincoln and built in the 1970s. This final slide shows the financing for this project. Design is advancing and we expect to be completed soon. I ask for your support in Article 28. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fulmer. We will also hear recommendations on Article number 28 from the Select Board and the Finance Committee. And while the Select Board representative is coming forward, I want to correct the number that I said a minute ago. As you can see, this is borrowing in the amount of $16.5 million, and the two-thirds vote is required due to the borrowing.
Carmen Reese, 52 Devon Street, member of the Select Board and speaking for the Board.
Ms. Reese.
Thank you. The Select Board unanimously recommends affirmative action on Article 28. The given of infrastructure is that it gets old and obsolete, becomes inefficient and ineffective, and eventually fails. Parts of our water infrastructure are over a century old, in need of repair, and at risk of future failure without repair. In addition, due to changes in regulation, parts of our system no longer meet state and federal standards. It is absolutely necessary to address these problems. Concord Public Works has been operating the Nagog Pond Water Treatment Facility for many years under an EPA waiver of the requirement for surface water filtration. Although the water has remained safe, the quantity of water we may use has been restricted, and the current treatment facility does not provide us with the resiliency that we need. It could not, for example, adequately treat the water in the event of a blue-green algae bloom. Town staff and their consultants have done a careful and professional job here. The proposed repairs and improvements will give us state-of-the-art treatment technology, energy efficiency, greater reliability, and longevity. The designs have been value engineered without compromising useful life. Neither the need to repair the infrastructure or the need to replace the treatment facility is a surprise. Funds have been put aside in anticipation of these capital projects to mitigate the additional expenditures. The impact on ratepayers thus will be limited to modest annual increases over the next 10 years, with no additional water projects on the horizon. In sum, this work is necessary to comply with regulations critical to maintaining the quality, quantity, and resiliency of Concord's water, and the Select Board recommends affirmative action.
Thank you, Ms. Reese. And now we will hear from a representative of the Finance Committee.
Triveni Upadhyay, Katrina Heights, member of the Finance Committee, speaking for the Finance Committee.
Mr. Upadhyay.
The Finance Committee recommends affirmative action and full support for this article. $16.5 million sounds like a lot of money of borrowing, but the good news is there is no tax impact. There will be no tax impact. So that's good news. So the borrowing cost is paid for by the water rates, which I believe is going to go up about 3 to 4%, which has been a traditional increase in water rate. So basically, the town has managed its affairs very well. I've been told, on behalf of the Finance Committee, that it was already being planned for over many years, and the funding is there to pay for the borrowing cost. So we recommend it, that your support. And what we get in return is a guaranteed supply of good water for a long time to come. So we recommend your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Upadhyay. So the floor is now open for discussion on Article 28, which is the $16.5 million borrowing for this, for our Nagog Pond water treatment facility improvements. And seeing no one approaching any microphones, the presentation, oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Microphone number 2 here in the auditorium.
Yes, I'm Earl Smith, 537 Hayward Mill Road.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My question regards whether the proposed water draw that we would be able to take from the pond with the improved infrastructure has been reviewed in light of the overall water flowing into the pond from groundwater. Will we be able to take the water that our infrastructure will support without drawing down the level in the pond?
Can I ask Mr. Fullman to come back to the podium to answer this question?
Very good question. I asked earlier this evening of our water department staff how much water is actually in Nagog Pond, and it is something in the order of 850 million gallons. To answer the question specifically, we are highly regulated in water drawdown and in the entire water system by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection's Water Division. They review issues such as drawdown, capacity, how much we'll be using, and so on. I might also add, just as a point of interest, that before we had the 6 wells and the 2 reservoirs that we have in addition to Nagog Pond, the entire water supply for the town came from Nagog and was often 2 to 2.5 million gallons per day, which is significantly less than the amount we use currently or anticipate to use.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions or clarifications or comments? Microphone number 2. I see there's someone at 4. Yes.
Yes, hi. Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. The other debt,
Mr. Banfield.
The other debt that we've been voting on throughout town meeting has all been excluded debt under Prop 2.5, but this debt is not. At least it's not stated in the warrant. We just heard from the floor that this will be covered by water fees, and I just want to know if that's why this is not considered to be excluded debt. I just want some clarification on what we're voting on there. Thanks.
Could we ask our town treasurer, Mr. Legalbo, to assume the podium, please, for an answer?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. That is correct. It is not tax supported at all. The only things that would go to a ballot for a debt exclusion would be tax supported debt.
I don't see anyone at a microphone in the cafeteria, but here, microphone number 2.
Connie Levine, 149 Stowe Street.
Ms. Levine.
I have a question. I know there's some controversy about the solar panels in Acton. And I think the meeting was delayed before the selectmen, the last meeting. So in the presentation, it was said that there are other options that they've looked at to funding, the cost of this. So I was just curious as to what would be the impact on this project if Acton refuses to allow the solar panels. What would be the other next option to operate this thing, and how much of more of an impact would that have than this proposed solar panels?
Mr. Fullman, could you provide us an answer again, please?
There has been controversy, particularly with the abutters to this area in Acton. Those are mostly people who live in the recently constructed Quail Ridge development, although there are other people in the community who are bothered by the expansion of this operation as well as the solar panels. I have a slide, I believe it's the next one there. Next one, please. And those areas on either side of the road represent the current configuration of solar panels, which is before the Acton Board of Selectmen. There has been some pushback from them. However, we do believe that we have legal rights to build on this property. Having said that, we are very seriously considering a cogeneration program, which effectively is the building of generators on the site, which would not have the impact shown by the solar. We're doing some very rigorous cost-benefit analysis. The numbers at this point look quite good. By having our own generation on the site, which would be fueled by gas, and we have a line of gas from 2A, we would be able to have our own power supply, except in the event of an emergency, which would be some backup. So this provides a very good opportunity to avoid some of the pushback that we've had from Acton, but it's still in the planning stage. And we will be meeting with the Board of Selectmen in Acton, I believe in June, somewhere around June 11th or 18th.
Thank you, Mr. Fullman. Seeing no speakers at any microphone, I think we're ready to come to a vote on Article 28, which requires a 2/3 majority funding for the Nagog Pond Water Treatment Facility. Please raise your ballots if you're in favor. All those who are opposed, please raise yours. Way more than the 2/3 are achieved in both rooms, near unanimity. So once again, we have an affirmative vote. On to Articles 29 and 30. Due to the near unanimity of so many votes so far this evening, we're moving through the warrant at a speedier pace than might otherwise have been anticipated. So I would just say a word of alert to petitioners or presenters on other articles who asked me if I thought we would reach 40 this or 40 that tonight, and I said, I never know, but I doubt it. I would just urge that everyone be prepared, depending on the pace that we maintain. So we come now to warrant article number 29, which is a citizen petition brought by Mr. Montague related to parking meters. It's found on page 83 of the Finance Committee report, and the motion is for affirmative action as printed in the warrant.
Bill Montague, 10 Walden Street, in honor of Montague Gallery. First thing I'd like to say is I want to pay my respects to the Board of Selectmen, the Town Manager, and also the DPW. I think we have the same goals in mind, and that's to keep the town the best little shopping town we have in the region. But the only difference between us is our point of view. And I'd like to give you the point of view of a retailer that I've been here for 40 years. And my feeling is that we have to get rid of the parking meters to keep the towns viable. We've already lost last year we lost some shops in the town, and we've had 3 vacant shops on Walden Street and Main Street for almost a year now, 10 months anyway. And people say, well, what's your proof of that? Well, the proof is that towns are going out of a lot of towns since a lot of businesses in 2008 have been in a very tight position of staying in business, and that proves that by the 3 towns, the 3 businesses that went out of town. And now I looked on the internet and I say, okay, what proof do you have of this? And I found that there's a handout I put out on Article 29, and I did a little research to find out if it's true or not, and it turned out to be a lot of towns around the nation are removing parking meters to keep their businesses in business. Now, this is a slide this is Bedford, and they don't have any parking meters, but they have parking spaces. And also, if you go to Acton, there's no parking meters in Acton. There's no parking meters in Stowe. And now, I happened to drive down Main Street in Hudson, if you go back, and a couple Sundays ago, and I noticed they have parking spaces but no meters. So I called the town policeman up of Hudson. He wasn't there, but I talked to his secretary, and I said, I noticed you don't have any parking meters. She says, that's right. She says, did you ever have them? She says, yes, we got rid of them 5 years ago. And everybody likes this system better. Now, they don't have any parking meters, there's spaces, but they have a 2-hour limit. So people were saying to me, well, if you're going to get rid of the parking meters, people are going to park there all day long. That's the argument that I've said so far. And this proves that you don't need parking meters to keep people from parking all day long. You just put up a sign. The parking meters are very expensive to maintain. They're mechanical. You have to change the batteries. You got to take the coins out every day. And they don't make any money for the town. That's the amazing thing. But when I heard that the town parking meters don't make any money. Everybody thought they did. So getting rid of them would save a lot of money. And my recommendation is that we get rid of the parking meters to save the Concord businesses and help prevent any more of us from going out of business.
Thank you, Mr. Montague. And you began so quickly, I didn't have a chance to ask for a second. Is there a second for this motion? I see that there is. We'll have a recommendation from the Select Board with regard to this article number 29.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Steve Ing, 12 Dalton Road, member of the Select Board, speaking on the board's behalf.
Mr. Ing.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Select Board unanimously recommends no action for Article 29. In 2015, the Select Board approved the town's comprehensive parking management plan, which focused on finding effective and creative solutions to improve parking experiences for all in Concord. The plan identified the many needs and interests of those visiting the West Concord and Concord Center business areas. The parking meter is an essential component of the parking management plan. In Concord, they are predominantly found at street locations, which are usually directly in front of or near the retail stores. The parking meter serves as a time management tool for increasing visitor and customer turnover, and depending on their location, have time limits ranging from 1 to several hours. Imagine if there were no parking meters. There would be no protection of these spaces from those who would park in these areas for long periods of time, such as, say, full-time employees in office space, employees in retail shops, or commuter train users. The parking meter serves as a way of designating spaces for those visiting the businesses in our districts. To be clear, our parking plan already offers free parking without time limits. These areas are located just usually a short walk away, rather than directly in front of shops and stores. So whether it is residents making their own deliberate choice to shop in Concord, or the town proclaiming a day to honor a large wheel of cheese, our community has always shown support for Concord businesses. And it's based on this desire for their success that the Select Board supports our town's parking plan, of which the parking meter plays a vital role. The Select Board recommends no action for Article 29. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ing. The floor is now open then for discussion of Article 29, which is a proposal to remove all parking meters from the town. I believe I see a speaker approaching microphone number 2.
Staggering to the microphone. William Cusin, 27 Concord Green.
Mr. Cusin.
I've been doing business in Concord for 50 years, and this has been wrestled with before over the last decades. And I wrote something down because I wanted to be sure that I said it correctly. I believe that removing parking meters from Concord would be a huge mistake. Removal invites very long-term parking, which negates the turnover essential for a healthy retail community. The handout provided by the petitioner lists 2 large cities as examples of municipalities that have removed parking meters. Comparing Dearborn, Michigan, and Salem, Oregon to Concord is akin to comparing oranges to kumquats, and provides no evidence beyond superficial assumptions that eliminating parking meters had anything to do with any business improvement in those cities. My wife and I are occasional visitors to Rockport, Mass., a very busy tourist town, which I equate more readily with Concord rather than Dearborn or Salem. The town is metered with meter heads that accept credit cards, cash, or mobile phones. The meters are easy to use, even for my fumbling fingers, and certainly there are very few empty storefronts. Any such are of a seasonal nature and fill up for the summer, fall. Let's not blame the meters for the difficulties we merchants may have coping with the new retail realities. I urge a no vote on removing the meters.
Thank you, Mr. Cusin. And a speaker at microphone number 1.
Rob Comer, 106 Riverdale Road. I don't
Comer.
know where I stand on the article, but I want to point out that unmetered spaces are not necessarily unprotected. I lived in Pasadena, California for a couple of years, and the police regularly patrolled the parking area. And if one sat one's car in a 2-hour spot, before too long after you parked, your car would be tagged with a mark of chalk by an officer walking by. And if you stayed there much past 2 hours, you'd end up with a ticket on your windshield. So there are options for doing that, and I don't know if those were taken into account in the parking plan. I wasn't paying close enough attention, but just want to consider that.
Thank you, Mr. Comer. Are there other speakers wishing to be heard on, oh, I'm up there in the back in microphone number 3. Thank you.
Kathy Little, 57 Munson Road.
Ms. Little.
Good evening. The removal of parking meters makes it easier for visitors to enjoy their day in Concord and spend their dollars in our town. The removal of meters supports local businesses, and it supports independent retailers, which are vital to Concord's commercial districts and unique characters. It helps make it easy for residents to buy local. The hassle of parking meters and parking restrictions flies in the face of Henry David Thoreau's Simplify, Simplify. I urge your favorable action on Article 29. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Little. Are there other voters wishing to be heard? In the cafeteria, microphone number 1.
Sue Felshen, 19 Sunnyside Lane.
Ms. Felshen.
As a member of the West Concord Task Force quite some years ago, I heard a lot of complaints from merchants about problems with parking, and they all had to do with the short term of parking that didn't allow people to have lunch or go to an appointment in town without getting ticketed. The town's new parking plan solves this problem by extending the amount of parking to be considerably more than an hour. I believe it's set at 3 hours at this point. I would have brought it to show you, but I would have needed a truck to bring in the 500-page The High Cost of Free Parking, which I read in its entirety, and which explains why free parking is not actually free and how it is subsidized in many expensive ways. It's bad for the environment as it encourages people to drive and move their cars from parking space to parking space and discourages people from walking or taking other means of transport. I don't want to bore you with all the many reasons why free parking is a bad idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Felshen. Seeing no other voters at microphones in the cafeteria or here in the auditorium, I think we're ready to vote. All those who are in favor of Article 29 to remove all parking meters in the town, please raise your colored voting slips. Thank you very much. All those who are opposed, please raise yours. The motion fails in the cafeteria and fails here in the auditorium by significant amounts, so Article 29 is not adopted. We come then to Article 30, which is also found on page 83 in the Finance Committee report. It too is a citizen petition which urges the town to remove snow from all sidewalks, streets, and gutters in certain specified areas by 8 a.m. On the morning following a snowstorm. Could we have the presenter? This is a citizen petition from Mr. Montague.
Bill Montague.
And before you start, can I ask whether there's a second for the motion? I see that there is.
I'm Bill Montague, 10 Walden Street, owner of Montague Gallery.
Please proceed.
I'd like to show the first slide, please, to show how long we've been removing snow from the town of Concord streets and sidewalks. And here's Mary Curtis, and you know, this must be 50, 60 years ago anyway. And I'd like to show the second slide, please. This is what happens when you... Now, since I've been in town, which is 40 years, the snow was always removed from the streets and sidewalks by 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was amazed at this because what they did was they would come down and they put signs on the snowbanks that says, no parking after midnight snow removal. And after midnight, these snow plows would come down and they push all the snow from the sidewalks and between the parking into the gutters. The big plows would come and push it into a big main embankment in the middle of the street. Then they had a huge snowblower would pick that up and shoot it into these big trucks. And it was done in a very short time. It was done by the town employees. And I thought it was very efficient. But today, from the past 4 or 5 years, they've been leaving the snow banks, like you can see here. And this is really damaging us merchants to have snow like this. Could I have the next slide, please? And you've got snow banks like this. People can't get out of their cars. And people tell me they come into town if they see the snow bank and they leave, because they can't get out of their cars. Next slide, please. This is
yeah, Mr. Montague, you can also see what's on the slides right there in front of you.
Sorry
so
about that.
Don't have to turn away from the microphone. Thank you.
Anyway, you can, this is on Main Street, and you can see Scott Vanderhoof shoveled his sidewalk off, but look at the rest of it. Could I have the next slide? And the next one? Now, there's a second reason, which is probably more important to remove the snow from the sidewalks, because what you can see here is the snow melted and then it turned to ice. Now, this is solid ice in front of the car. You can't get out of there without standing on ice. Have the next slide. This is on Walden Street. No, this is Main Street, I believe. That's also solid ice going right under those cars. You couldn't get out the door without sliding and hurting yourself. I'd like to show you the last slide. The next one, please. This is the one that this lady was standing out in front of my gallery. She stood there for several minutes on her feet, standing on ice. Now, this is an elderly lady. I thought any minute her feet are going to go out from under and she'll be very damaged. So this is probably a more important reason for removing all the snow from the city by 8 o'clock in the morning. Like I said, they've been doing for over 35 years since I've been here, and I think they should continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montague. We will again hear a recommendation from the Select Board and also from the Public Works Commission.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Steve Ing, 12 Dalton Road, member of the Select Board speaking on the board's behalf.
Mr. Ing.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Select Board recommends no action for Article 30. The Public Works Commission has had a snow removal policy which has been in place for many years. This policy provides a framework and criteria which allows the Public Works Department to evaluate and determine the most effective response to each individual snow event that occurs each year. The policy takes into consideration factors such as total accumulation, time of season, forecast for pending storms, and allows the Public Works Department to coordinate various town resources and can also include private contractors to assist with that effort custom to each individual event. The Select Board considered the snow removal criteria specified in this article and found the requirements raised many more questions than clarified in their process. The 8 a.m. Deadline, does it impact? How does Public Works address that deadline if the snow is still ongoing, if the storm just ended at 7, and various other unpredictable situations that weather always brings with it? I think as the Select Board considered that, there's quite a bit of potential cost to try to comply with this time requirement. The Select Board believes the current Public Works Commission policy for snow removal still serves the town in the most effective and efficient way possible. We feel that to be required to have comply with a zero tolerance requirement could really have much more impact financially to our snow removal services. Select Board recommends no action on Article 30. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ing. And we'll now hear from a representative of the Public Works Commission.
Nick Pappas, 300 Virginia Road, member of the Public Works Commission and speaking for the Public Works Commission.
Mr. Pappas.
The Public Works Commission, working with the Public Works Department, has had a clear snow removal policy for over 10 years. Basically, the policy is to keep the roads, sidewalks, and parking lots of the town passable with priority to emergency vehicles, within the constraints imposed by weather and finances. The actual operational practice, the next slide. The actual operational practice is, first you have to understand the town has 107 miles of public roadway, miles of sidewalk, 44 miles of which are plowed. I remember when I first moved to Concord, which was about 1970, the downtown area was plowed by horse-drawn plows, which was quite a surprise because I came from the city. At any rate, we deploy 4 plows these days, 4 mechanical plows along 4 different routes throughout a storm. Plowing of the roadways and sidewalks is treated with equal priority and begins when there's about 2 inches of snow on the ground. And it continues until the roadways are clear and the storm is over. This has been, again, our practice for over 10 years. Next slide. Specifically regarding snow removal, we do remove snow from parking lots when there's an accumulation greater than 3 inches. The snow is removed from the commercial areas, and that depends on several factors, including how much snow is accumulated, where it's accumulated, what the weather forecast is, and what the time of year is. And consider yesterday's storm and how little snow is on the ground this morning to consider the impact of time of year. There are 2 different approaches to snow removal. The town uses both. We use town employees and town equipment. We also bring in outside contractors as needed, depending on the nature of the weather event. I guess bottom line is that today Concord Public Works balances the needs of the community when deploying snow fighting resources. Article 30 unbalances the process, giving specific areas higher priority for deployment of people, equipment, and dollars. Article 30 raises the cost of snow removal substantially and sets a strict timing requirement that may not be appropriate to many weather events. The Public Works Commission urges no action on Article 30.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. So the floor is now open for discussion of Article 30, the citizen petition, which would be to remove snow by 8 a.m. following a snowstorm from specified areas, business areas in Concord Center, Main and Walden Streets, near the depot on Thoreau Street, and in West Concord on Commonwealth Avenue. And I see again a voter approaching microphone number 2.
William Cusin, 27 Concord Green.
Mr. Cusin.
It's interesting because that first picture that which Mr. Montague put up shows USSIN across the street, right over that wonderful creature that I used to watch when I lived in an apartment as a young man, over the store. Anyway, that shows that I have been in Concord for a long time. And I do want to emphasize that I think the Public Works Department does a marvelous job on Concord and certainly Concord Center. I can't speak to the other areas, but I have driven through them and they look like they're well taken care of. To restrict them to this kind of a calendar and a date and a time is ludicrous. Not knowing what the snowfalls are going to be and what the accumulations are going to be. There's all kinds of factors. It sounds to me like the Public Works have this well in hand. So let's not obstruct them and tie their hands. Let's let them do their job. Kudos to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cusin. Are there other voters wishing to be heard? Seeing no one approaching the microphone in the cafeteria or here in the auditorium, all those who are in favor of Article number 30, please raise your colored voting ballots. Thank you. All those who are opposed, please raise yours. Thank you very much. The vote is significantly in the negative, so town meeting votes not to adopt Article number 30. The next item on the warrant, number 31, was approved last night on the consent calendar. We move now to a group of planning board bylaw articles, and we've been hard at this now for a little over 2 hours, so I'd like to propose a 2-minute stand in place and stretch break for the body. Could the body please come to order? Thank you very much. As you recall, we've had a procedural vote to take up no new business after 10 o'clock, so we have essentially a half an hour now to proceed with bylaw matters. So we take up at this point warrant article number 32, which is a demolition review bylaw. As the motion is to adopt it as printed in the warrant. Is there a second to this motion? I see that there is. Let me ask the presenter to identify himself.
Jeffrey Taylor, 204 Nishotic Road, Chair of the Historical Commission, and here representing the Historical Commission.
Please proceed.
People live here and move to Concord for our schools and our preserved open spaces, but also for the unique historic character of our architectural landscape. As demolition of old structures has rapidly increased in recent past, it is clear that that landscape is quickly being altered. Demolition in Concord happens summarily and almost always without any opportunity for us to consider whether an important part of our history is being permanently lost. Slide, please. One reason for this is Concord's current demolition delay bylaw. Demolition delay is an effective tool in the majority of neighboring towns, which you can see on the map here in green, which helps preserve historic sites. It's surprising to most people that among all the towns in Massachusetts, Concord has one of the most ineffectual demolition delay bylaws in the state. Slide. People here assume that our history and historic structures are protected. The simple truth is that they are not. Outside of the 6 small historic districts, only 58 buildings in Concord have any protection whatsoever against immediate demolition. Slide. A list of unprotected structures surprises many people. Some of these are 200 to 300 years old, and there's no protection against immediate demolition upon application. Slide, please. Under the new bylaw, all structures in Concord built prior to 1941 and either on the National or State Register of Historic Places or included in the Concord Survey of Historical Resources are deemed historically significant and subject to at least modest review prior to total demolition. In many cases, this will be a 2-week review. In some, it will require a public hearing within 6 weeks. And in a few instances, it will be determined that a building is important enough to Concord's history that it is preferably preserved, and alternatives to its demolition should be pursued, and a demolition delay put into effect. The process to determine whether a building should be preferably preserved is efficient, fair, and determined by objective standards. Next, please. How does it work? Well, with an application for total demolition, the CHC and Town Planning Department will review within 2 weeks to determine if the historically significant structure might possibly be preferably preserved. If no, then demolition may proceed. If yes, slide please, then within 4 weeks of that date, a public hearing will take place. Following that hearing, the Commission will decide whether the building should in fact be preferably preserved. If not, then demolition may proceed. But if yes, then up to a year's delay may be imposed. The purpose of the delay is to seek alternatives to demolition, such as moving the building or possibly modifying the plan, and at the very least to carefully document the structure so that there will at least be some historic record for what was once there and is now gone. If no alternatives to demolition are found, then demolition can finally take place. It's important to remember that this is demolition delay, not demolition denial. Slide, please. The standards used by the Commission to decide whether the preferably preserved category applies includes the following elements, which you can see. They include age, integrity, its role in Concord history, famous residents, etc. No one element is dispositive. It will be the accumulation of facts that can weight the decision one way or the other. Slide, please. This map shows in green the areas where the currently completely unprotected pre-1941 structures exist. As you can see, it's hard to read on the map, but the town center, West Concord Center, Lowell Road, Elm Street, and parts of Monument all have large areas currently with no demolition review. Here, next slide, one sees Hubbardsville near Main Street, just outside the adjacent historic district. All the places in green are homes, slide please, which can be demolished by simply applying for an application to do so. Slide please. Another shot. All these houses are unprotected. Slide please. And here's West Concord Center, a unique historic streetscape whose wholesale demolition can go forward without the slightest review. Slide please. But why now? Well, because demolition of pre-1941 houses has risen sharply over the last year to 41% in 2015. But more importantly, 6% of Concord's known historic resources have been demolished in the past decade. Now, you should also know that this law does not place an ambiguous cloud on property. If someone might want to sell a house or possibly demolish a house on the list sometime in the future, they need merely apply for the demolition permit. A review will be quickly completed, the historic status of the house known, but no demolition is required. Last slide, please. And let me leave on this note. Next slide, please. Concord's history does not end with the prehistoric natives, the Puritan colonials, the Minutemen, the Transcendentalists. History is a moving target. We cannot know what it is. Perhaps the childhood home of America's next great author sits in an undiscovered spot here in town right now. What seems common today may be tomorrow's treasure. If we had not been vigilant, the Robbins House seen here would not now be permanently preserved in our national park. Part of our compact as Concordians is to work together as a community to protect and preserve the important parts of our present for future generations. As an experienced carpenter will tell you, measure twice and cut once. This law is not a panacea, but it is an important step toward assuring that we are conscientious citizens and worthy stewards of Concord's remarkable legacy. We urge you to support this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And we will now hear a representative of the Select Board to explain their recommendation.
I'm Alice Kaufman, 1615 Lowell Road, member of the Select Board and speaking on the board's behalf.
Ms. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Concord is proud of its cultural and historic place in New England and the United States history. We've done a pretty good job of preserving some of the oldest historic homes, our gathering places, writings, monuments, and cemeteries of our past. But history is made every day, and we ask which of our structures today will be historical landmarks someday in the future. A town-wide survey revealed that residents place town character pretty high in the list of important attributes, ranking up there close with schools and taxes. And I met a woman just last week when I was waiting on the train platform going into work. She had just moved to Concord. She said she was still pinching herself that she was living in this town that was steeped in history and the historic buildings. She was so excited. The proposed demolition review bylaw will give our town a practical and predictable way to evaluate the historical and cultural significance of structures built before 1941 and to document their place in our community. To be clear, the proposed bylaw does not prevent structures from being renovated or torn down and replaced. Rather, the bylaw allows us to preserve our cultural past by conducting an assessment of the structure's historical significance and documenting it through photos, drawings, descriptions, and social and cultural history. The Select Board weighed the potential burden on homeowners and to the town to implement the demolition review bylaw and concluded that the impacts would not be significant. The Select Board also felt that preserving our history and town character are important values and see the demolition review bylaw as providing us the opportunity to do so. The Select Board unanimously recommends affirmative action on Article 32.
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. And the three other town organizations, our Planning Board, all recommend affirmative action on this item. They are the Planning Board, the Historic District Commission, and the West Concord Advisory Committee. So the floor is now open for discussion of Article 32, which is to adopt the new demolition review bylaw as printed in the warrant. I see a speaker at microphone number 1.
Yeah. My name is Jim Bing. I live at 367 Thoreau Street.
Please proceed.
Yeah. Article 32 damages the value of homes built before 1941, of which mine and my wife's is one. Anything that impacts the time-sensitive nature of a home sale will have a potential negative impact on that property's value. In particular, elderly can be impacted negatively by this because they may not have up to 12 plus months to wait for a decision to be made about the sale of their home. This article is flawed because there's essentially no due process. There's no independent review. All relevant decisions are left to the Concord Historical Commission, the Planning Department, and their designees. Unlike other areas that impact property, such as environmental concerns, wetlands issues, and so forth, the Commonwealth does not license anyone as an expert or a professional in the assessment of the historical status of a property. Also, contrary to what the Historical Commission has indicated, it's not a simple matter to get an assessment from them as to the status of your home. They say simply apply for a demolition permit, but to do that, you need to get an acknowledgement from all utilities that the utilities have been disconnected. That's part of the demolition process, permit process. This proposed article or bylaw is tremendously flawed. It's bad governance. It puts tremendous power in the hands of the unelected and the unlicensed. I urge you to vote no on Article 32. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See a speaker at, we want to hear from other voters first. Microphone number 2.
Hi, Connie Levine, 149 Stowe Street.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I live in the center, and I'm also a real estate agent, so I certainly understand some of the impacts that could happen with demolition delay. But I remember just this year, you know, there was a house on the Rose Street. It was right near my house, and I was walking my dog, and it was like a big old farmhouse. And one day they were like cutting down the trees, and there was a real estate sign up there, and I saw that it was a house that you didn't really see before because of the trees, and I was like, oh wow, that's a really cool house. It has a big wraparound porch. I said, oh, that'll be neat. I want to see what that comes on the market at. And then the next day, I walked by it with my dog, and the real estate sign was down, and the house was gone. So, and I took a picture of it with my phone. That I was so upset by it. And so I think that, you know, this is only really an issue if someone wants to demolish the house. And like in this case, I bet someone would have been happy to buy and restore that nice farmhouse, but they weren't given the opportunity because some builder just came in, knocked it down, and put up a $2.5 million house that's still sitting there unsold. So I'm in favor of this, and I wanted to find out what the mechanism of notifying people when something comes on like this, because right now, you know, you never know when someone buys a house if they're going to plan on tearing it down or not, unless I guess you're like in a butter, maybe you know. But I think an important thing would be a notification to everyone, ideally, in the town, like whether these could be published in the newspaper or something. So you'd have time to, you know, some of them could, I guess you could decide as quickly as 2 weeks, you said. I'd want to see if there was a mechanism for notification of people that something's going to potentially be demolished.
Thank you very much. We'll give an opportunity for a response to that question and other points made. Mr. Taylor?
It isn't complicated, according to everything we've been told, to get a permit. you don't have to disconnect. That's what I've been told. If there's other information, then it's contrary to what we were informed. We actually went very specifically to the idea of getting a preemptive ruling on a house, whether or not it was, we would move on within 2 weeks at the most. 6 weeks with a hearing. Your answer to your question is if it's deemed to be preferably preserved, then there would be a public hearing and there'd be notice to the public hearing. If it's not deemed to be preferably preserved in the initial 2 weeks, I don't know the mechanism for notification to the town, but I'm sure there could be some way. I don't know why there'd be any reason why there couldn't be a publication of a demolition application. I mean, I've never seen them published that way before, but it's possible that could come about. And the idea of volunteers doing this, there are major cities in America with volunteers running their demolition delay groups. It is primarily a volunteer-run operation throughout Massachusetts. I think Cambridge has some staff. And the whole idea of demolition delay, this is for complete demolition. Most cities in Massachusetts have a demolition review or delay if it's 25% or more demolition. So, I mean, this is a very, very conservative approach to causing some reflection on demolition prior to its happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And I see another speaker at microphone number 1.
Yes, hi, I'm Janet Sawyer. I live at 367 Thoreau Street.
Ms. Sawyer.
I attended a meeting of the Historical Commission recently, and I suggested to them that the cutoff date of pre-1941 was arbitrary and too inclusive, to which I got a couple of answers. One person on the committee said, well, pre-World War II represents the end of craftsmanship in home building in the USA. Oh, okay. And another response to my comment was that that's the end of when a 2x4 was a 2x4. Who knew? All I can say is I'm a retired person in my 70s. My home is my single largest asset. I'm planning to move closer to my grandchildren in California. And let me tell you, when I want to sell and when I want to move, I want to move. I don't know how many more days or months or years I have. I thought I lived in a free country, and I want to be able to sell my house to a developer or a young couple when I want to. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone number 2.
Michelle Flum, 324 Sudbury Road, the house of the studio of Daniel Chester French.
Please proceed.
It is because of people's foresight, such as yourselves, that we continue to enjoy the studio of such an incredible artist and the surrounding grounds. I ask you to do the same for many historic residences in town. It is what makes Concord, Concord. Please join me in supporting this bylaw.
Thank you very much. In the cafeteria, a speaker at microphone number 1.
Marty Plotkin, 54 Francis Street.
Mr. Plotkin.
I'd like to speak in favor of this amendment and remind everyone who would like to sell their houses in Concord that in large part the value of those houses arises because of the character of the town. And the phrase that comes to mind is killing the goose that lays this golden egg that we're all privileged to share.
Thank you. Microphone number 2.
Oh, hello. Kate Shartner, 888 Sudbury Road.
Ms. Shartner.
I'm a member of the Historic Districts Commission, but I'm not speaking on their behalf. I'm also one of those volunteers who for 18 years served on Georgetown's Historic Review Commission in Washington, D.C., which is generally considered one of the best preserved areas in the country. And I think people there are pretty happy with how it went. I just wanted to say that demolition delay bylaws are really the lightest of preservation light. They're not meant to forbid change, but rather to manage it intelligently. Protection really is no more of a violation of individual property rights than are many other rules and laws that we commonly accept, like myriad zoning, Department of Public Works requirements, or for another example, condominium CCRs, covenants and restrictions. They're all commonly accepted by property rights advocates. Cultural landscape, which someone was speaking about when you are walking by a house and you recognize it and then suddenly it's gone, is an important thing. And I think this Article 32 will help protect that in Concord. So I hope you'll vote in favor of it. Thanks.
Thank you. And there's a speaker in the cafeteria at microphone number 1.
Walter Burge, 100 Kais Road.
Mr. Burge.
I'm concerned about two things. One is there's this sort of we and they, as if a developer is an evil person by definition, and of course that is simply ridiculous. And I think we ought to try to eliminate that kind of language from our talk. The second one is a kind of pretentiousness that's crept into this, as if every dwelling in Concord is somehow worth preserving because it's in Concord. And that simply isn't true. The dynamic of an architectural locale is the fact that it does change. Things get torn down, other things get built. The house that is built now may not be made with perfect 2x4s, but 100 years from now it may be seen as a thing of beauty. It feels to me as if we've gotten into a strange fairyland where if we're in Concord, we need to preserve because we're in Concord, and I think that's patently ridiculous.
Thank you, Mr. Burge. Seeing no other, is that a speaker here at microphone number 2?
Elizabeth Eldon, 347 Old Bedford Road.
Ms. Eldon.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm a realtor in town. As one of the prior speakers said about herself, I've also served on the Planning Board, the Finance Committee, and the Board of Assessors. For people who know me, I do a tremendous amount of research, learning everything I can before I express an opinion. So, of course, I ran a multitude of analyses to find out if, in fact, this type of a bylaw would affect property values. And I think that because of the criteria of the bylaw, the category or the bucket that the property has to fall into, it has tremendous value because of its history. It's not just every single house prior to 1941. Excuse me. And that historic value translates into the monetary value of the property. So I would want to reassure folks that this type of a bylaw isn't going to negatively impact them, and it will create the opportunity to at least document, if not preserve, the entire structure. So it's not a question of can I put this particular shutter or paint my house a certain color. This is an actual complete and total removal of that structure. So I urge you to support this bylaw. I think it's a really great way for our town to join other communities in protecting the things that are so valuable to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eldon. Is that a speaker at microphone number 4? I see it is.
Leslie Michelle Tao, 111 Losbrook Road.
Please proceed.
I don't see this bylaw as protecting every single house before 1941. I do see it as providing a mechanism for there to be a bit of a slight pause before a structure can be demolished and disappear overnight. That's all it is. It's just a mechanism to provide a pause in order to preserve a range of beautiful houses in this town. So I urge support of this article.
Thank you. And seeing no other speakers at any of the microphones I guess someone's approaching back there at microphone 4 is once again tonight in the shadows, and we're going to need to move that tomorrow night so we can see. Microphone number 4.
Arthur Walker, 13 Chestnut Street.
Mr. Walker.
Concord is indeed a unique town, and it's would be hard to compare that, again, comparing Concord to many other towns. I won't name them, but I would say the analogy of comparing oranges and kumquats or something would may be analogous to Concord because of other less historic towns. Concord is unique in its historical lure to people from all corners of the planet. And I think that is only one consideration. I think the uniqueness of Concord's history should alone be worth putting something like this in motion. Also, the type of speed in which developers can suddenly overnight take down a structure, whether it's historic or not, I think is something we should all be concerned about. And one last thing, I think the date 1941, pre-1941, seems a little bit arbitrary, and I just wonder if at a town meeting 30 years from now, some post-1941 houses might indeed be considered historic or worth preserving. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Is there anyone else in the shadows up there behind you at microphone 4? No. Microphone 1.
Thank you. Ryan Bucas, 1360 Monument Street.
Mr. Bucas.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Our house is listed. It's one of 58 houses protected by the current demolition delay bylaw, which is a real bylaw and has been in existence for some time. We're proud that our house is on that demolition delay. We don't want it torn down. It was started being built in 1744. It, in fact, was the poster child in the previous town meeting motion. At that time, the houses that were included in the demolition delay were identified and voted upon by the town meeting. The people whose houses were thus affected had an opportunity to speak as to whether or not they would be included. The present proposal indicates houses which fall in the historic district or the like, okay, but it also says any house within the historic survey. That includes more than 1,000 houses. In fact, it includes approximately 20% of all the houses in the town of Concord fit within that category, and I submit that few of those 1,000 people know that their houses are thus restricted. And beyond that, it then provides that any house not so listed becomes historically significant if two people decide that it may be historically important and then submit it for a more complex review. Those people have criteria which are quite vague and, in fact, I think cannot be formally justified. Now, that further means that a historic commission that exists today may have a different opinion from a historic commission that exists in another year or 2 or 5 years. I believe that these things are very bad things for policy. I think that we should not have policies which are set in that way and vaguely. However, my other half sort of says it would be nice to have some reduction in the amount of demolition. 3 houses down on Monument Street this year. But I think, and so I'm going to vote for this against my whole better judgment in hopes, and I say this with deep concern, in hopes that the zoning board, the planning board, the historic commission will come back with something which enables people to know in advance the status of their house and not have it that range. You've turned off my microphone. Thank you.
We have ways. Seeing no speakers now at any of the microphones, I think we are ready to vote on Article 32 as printed in the warrant, which is to adopt the new proposed demolition delay bylaw. All those who are in favor of this article, please raise your colored voting slips. Thank you very much. All those who are opposed, please raise yours. Thank you very much. The matter is adopted overwhelmingly by far more than 2/3, and so it is a vote of this meeting. We come then to Article number 30, the zoning bylaw amendment related to combined business residence. And if the proponent, yes, is coming forward. Is there a second for this motion? I see that there is.
Mr. Moderator, Gary Kleiman. I live at 57 Central Street, member of the Planning Board, speaking on behalf of the Planning Board.
Please proceed, Mr. Kleiman.
Thank you. Planning Board moves Article 34 as printed in the warrant related to affordable housing requirements for combined business residence uses. Planning Board has introduced this amendment to the zoning bylaw in order to tweak one section of the bylaw related to affordable housing requirements for combined business residence uses. Specifically, this amendment would eliminate affordable housing requirements for combined business residence uses where only 1, 2, or 3 residential units are planned. However, the amendment would retain the current affordable housing requirement if 4 or more residential units are planned. Why the change? The present bylaw requires that 20% of residential units created within any combined business residence development be made affordable. Now, there's no question that affordable housing is a laudable goal, and the Planning Board wants to continue to encourage the development of affordable housing through the 20% requirement. However, we also recognize that for owners or developers of relatively small properties with the potential to develop only 3 or fewer residential units, that meeting this 20% requirement, affordable requirement, is likely to render a project uneconomic for some property owners. We believe that this is borne out by the fact that no new combined business residence units have been created since this requirement was adopted by town meeting in 2006. By allowing the creation of up to 3 or fewer residential units in a combined business residence development without affordable housing requirements, our hope is to encourage the development of a much-needed housing option for Concord. Smaller clusters of 1, 2, or 3 units in existing or new commercial properties that are located within the village centers, close to services and transportation, will enable smart growth without creating an added burden on town services. This style of housing would also complement and enhance the village atmosphere that we're trying to preserve. If adopted by town meeting, this amendment means that when a larger development is proposed, if you could back up one, I think. When a larger development is proposed, affordable housing requirements remain unchanged. They would continue to promote the creation of affordable housing options. For example, if a development like the 20-unit Concord Crossing near Thoreau Depot were to be proposed in the future, it would still need to meet the required minimum of 20% affordable housing. However, a smaller building in the village centers that might be appropriate for 3 or fewer residential units would not have to meet this 20% requirement. We hope that this change may allow property owners to consider adding a small number of residential units where we feel that they would be consistent with the village scale or character. On behalf of the Planning Board, I move that the town take affirmative action on Article 34 as printed in the warrant, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kleiman. The floor is now open then for discussion of Article 34, this zoning bylaw amendment that relates to combined business residence units. A 2/3 vote is required because this is a zoning bylaw modification. Are there speakers wishing to be heard? Seeing no one at microphones in either the cafeteria or here, all those who are in favor of Article 34, please raise your colored voting slips. Thank you very much. All those who are opposed, please raise yours. I see it passes overwhelmingly and by far more than the 2/3 required. We voted earlier this evening to take up no new business after 10:01. The digital clock in the sky said after 10 o'clock. The digital clock in the sky tells me that it is 10:01. So I think we have come to the conclusion of this evening's session. We will be in recess and take up until 7 p.m. Tomorrow evening when we will be taking up Article number 36, and we thank you very much for your participation tonight.